Welcome back to the X podcast, where I am back with Tim Moore and Dr. Wes Beavis.
We kept him around for another one.
Kept him around.
Yeah.
The last one was so riveting. It's amazing to have you.
It's so good being with you guys.
Yeah.
I feel right at home with you.
Great.
Our first brunch, was it Saturday morning?
Yeah.
Saturday morning.
More
We're
than he
sitting
was
there outside eating breakfast, and he's just pouring wisdom through that Australian accent. And in my mind, I kind of felt for a moment like I was transported to an Indiana Jones movie with Sean Connery, and it just felt so epic. And I was like, I kind of want to be him when I grow up.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't have admitted that online. Okay. So anyways, we want to talk about some of the spicier, I guess, perhaps more controversial aspects of mental health.
But becoming more popular.
Yeah, but becoming more popular. Honestly, more normalized, a lot of it.
Yeah.
And that is some of the alternative healthcare treatments when it comes to mental health.
Yeah.
And that's a big spectrum. That's a big spectrum, all the way from the holistic health community that treats everything through, herbal medicine, and meditation or whatever it may be, all the way to, the far extreme we've talked about of ayahuasca. You have a lot of celebrities coming out now saying that there's this tea that's been used for centuries in places like Peru and remote parts of Africa that people will go on a weekend trip and through...
You go on a trip.
Yeah, literally a trip to go on a trip. And
psychedelics.
through hallucinogenic, transcendent experiences, a lot of them will say it will recalibrate them and improve their mental stability. And so there's a lot of places we could start it, but I'm just curious.
Didn't the Beatles write a bunch of their hits, under the influence of something?
I don't know.
They'd go to India and they would try out all types of different stuff. And
Really? I don't know that
true.
story, but it's probably true because 60s and 70s, right? At least here in America, we're known for that.
Yeah, I couldn't see them.
What's your experience with
I couldn't see
psychedelics?
Ringo going, "Come on, guys, we shouldn't be doing that. We're professional songwriters."
Yeah, right. You were telling me about how that one time when you took what was that plant that you said you took? It sent you on a trip down the river. Do you remember?
Dr. West does not even know what to do with
I've
us.
even plants that have sent me to the restroom. never.
Okay.
I've never taken anything
like
that was mind altering.
You've not had any mind. Okay. Remember when you were telling me about the gummies that you were having every night? Though you said that your wife was making, and they were really good. That you said you really found them relaxing.
Dr. West, I apologize, but but
does that
honestly,
to everybody, so
I do. I like that. That was good. I like how you. But that might be a good place to start because that's a mild form. I know a lot of people.
Yeah.
That for them they're like, look, a lot of like sleep aid medicine has all this junk in it. It's not good for me.
Yeah.
But there's this natural. There's some gummies you can
CBD.
order with CBD, but not even CBD. There's a lot of gummies now you can find a way to order with levels of THC.
Yes.
That they say, look, it doesn't really get me high, but it's a relaxation thing. I feel like it's good for me. It helps me. I mean, even with stuff as mild as that, I'm just curious your thoughts or if you have reservations towards some of that.
Or do you prescribe them?
Do I prescribe them? No, because I generally have people coming to me saying I've grown too dependent on these. And could you help me become less dependent on these?
No.
I think it ties in with human nature. We're always looking for something that we can take that will give us the competitive advantage, whether it's creatively and also something that we can take that can calm us down. And
do you think it's bad? I mean, is there a big difference between that and other medicines that are harvested from the earth and natural? I mean, ibuprofen. I know that's an example, but just so many of our medicines have come from things. This is the argument that I've heard, right? They're from plants. They're from things that are on earth because they're God-given plants that do this. And, we turn around when it comes to whether it is certain doses of marijuana and certain, forms of taking. Here's yet another thing that maybe is available to us? What makes one worse than the other than the stigma that goes with it?
Yeah, what would be medically prescribed and what would be recreational or self-prescribed.
Yeah.
And it's not my field of expertise, but where I do have some expertise is dealing with people who have built this into their behavioral repertoire.
Okay.
And generally I see the negative side of it.
Okay.
And, you'd be surprised at, I counsel a lot of leaders, and you'd be surprised at,
Share some names.
Share some names. All right. Well, there was this one. You're kidding.
I know. So you're saying you experienced it. See, I think one of the things that I continually hear, again, a lot of this is more in the world of our pop culture psychologists, not real ones, but pop culture psychologists, right? Is that taking these supplements, whether it is the gummies or this, they're not addictive. They're just a small aid to help me relax to this. Like, I feel like that is the presentation of them for them. But you're saying you see, is it just because people feel guilty that they're doing it, they're coming to you, or is it creating other problems in their life? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, one leader I worked with, his ingestion of these non-prescribed medications actually cost him his marriage, because it brought out it brought out a side of his nature that his wife just said, not in my lifetime. And he was, self-prescribing this. I won't tell you what it was. Yeah. And he just didn't, he would, the more he took of it, the more he developed a psychological and physiological addiction to it. And then, he didn't realize that it was having a negative effect upon his family. So I see that side.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, you're asking a legitimate question. What's the difference between, chamomile tea,
right,
and some of these CBD medications that are natural medications that can calm you down for bed. It's like they both have those calming qualities, and frankly, I think some of the medications, and I get this from all the Marines and guys in the Army that I counseled during my clinical internship. They would use a lot of these, and it would create problems for them, and they, but they were open to trying it because they'd be suffering from PTSD or what have you. Flashbacks, and really struggle to go to sleep, and so they would try everything, and sometimes it would be a problem. And what they would often say is, I go to the VA and they just prescribe me these high dosage sleeping meds, and they'd go, we'd take a whole bunch of them, and then wouldn't help us get to sleep, so we would try these alternatives. Yeah. And so, I understand that people can be so desperate for, sleep, and they're so anxious about not sleeping that they will try anything, and they will dose up even to dangerous levels.
And in part of what you mentioned, there's always a danger in self-prescribing. But do you, on the flip side, are you optimistic about there being a positive future that's backed by research when it comes to some of these alternative forms? Like, right now there's so much funding going in Johns Hopkins of ayahuasca and these different things to treat, things like PTSD. Or even, I have somebody really close to me. I won't go in detail, but I'll just say I have a friend that has had chronic back pain for 9 years. Been to chiropractors, acupuncture, everything. This person's straight-laced, doesn't drink, doesn't smoke. They have their doctorate.
Yeah.
They research the heck out of everything.
Yep.
And then finally decided to buy spores for magic mushrooms, and they microdose, and back pain immediately gone, and their mental health improved.
Yeah.
And it's like, I would never suggest that for people, but that's like, what do you do with that? And is there a future, a research-backed optimism of a future in some of these things that could treat people with PTSD, nerve pain?
Well, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the medications that we've got today have, been discovered, developed because of, chronic situations needing something. Look at penicillin. Wasn't that was something that was discovered, naturally growing
by chance.
Yeah. And but it's such a nuanced area because even antibiotics, which I'm a great believer in antibiotics because it's really saved me from some infections in my life. But with even something good can be overprescribed. And you can take so many antibiotics that it'll strip your gut's microbiome it can strip your gut of microbiome necessary for things, even mental health, and you become resistant to antibiotics. So when you really need them, they don't have the effect. So I'm just it's not my field of expertise, even though I see people in my clinical practice who are doing like your friend or family member who has discovered that this is really helpful. There have been some people that have been in the the closing stages of suffering from cancer. And it's like the only thing that allows them to be able to keep food down is to ingest some of this non-prescribed, or more and more it's being prescribed these days, cannabis. And so it's like somebody suffering from that type of pain and cancer. It's like,
why not?
Have at it.
I'm curious, in your, I know you're a doctor, but you're a doctor of psychology, right? And so I think I asked you this before. I mean, you don't really deal with medicines or prescriptions necessarily, or like you don't prescribe them.
No.
You deal with it. I'm curious when it comes to your field. So you almost have, right, and I'm sure there's way more than this. I'm intentionally minimizing this, or I'm limiting it. Let me just say it that way. You have more of the psychiatry, which is going to include the field of medicine.
Yes.
And then you have psychology, which is going to be mostly mental, right? Therapy of the mind.
Yes.
Less of the physiological aspects of it, or at least not the prescribing. How would you define the differences? And then I have a follow-up question with that.
Yeah, okay. So a doctor of medicine majoring in psychiatry has done the whole chemistry and the drug interactions and that whole thing.
Okay.
And there's a lot of liability with that because you've got to know what drugs interact with, in a negative way with other drugs. But we do, as psychologists, we don't prescribe medication, but we deal with people, and we recommend that, after they've tried all of the other, treatments for anxiety or depression, all the more holistic, because if somebody is stuck in their bedroom spending, 15 hours a day on a screen, dark room, they never get outside, they never walk as far as the front mailbox and never hardly see any sunshine. There's a lot of prescriptive benefit in doing that. But if they've if they've done all the health, behavioral, and cognitive, working through things, we would absolutely recommend. Perhaps you need. Or not even perhaps, I'd recommend that you make an appointment with a psychiatrist and see whether medication can be helpful. And so we become actually, between a psychiatrist and a psychologist, we become a treatment team. I've talked to psychiatrists, and psychiatrists have talked to me, because psychiatrists generally don't specialize in actually sitting down
and
spending an hour.
Or therapy.
Therapy, talk therapy.
So I guess my question to you is going to be more as we're talking about addressing mental health in your field. I was curious, and so I guess you kind of answered it. What's your perspective of medicine versus using other forms of therapy? And so it sounds like the branch that you're on is you specialize in trying every form of cognitive therapy, whatever is available, and you see behavioral therapy, and you see medicine is possibly a more of I'd say maybe a last resort or a next step if these don't work.
Yeah.
And psychiatrists, I was curious about how that sits with you, versus going straight to medicines.
Well,
do you guys ever not see eye to eye? Like as a psychiatrist, they're going to listen, they're going to hear, they're going to go, sounds like you got ADD, sounds like you have OCD, sounds like these are the symptoms, so I'm going to prescribe, here you go.
Right.
Come back and see me and tell me if it gets better.
Yes. Or come back and we'll
adjust
your dosage.
Is there a difference of philosophy? Or do you see it more like you said, team?
Yeah.
Or is it a difference of philosophy? Like, do you reserve the medicines for we've tried all these other things, and you would prefer to try these things first before you?
Yeah.
Which I think most people would probably rather not be on a medication, and who knows for how long. But
although human nature is like, if there's a pill that can make me feel instant, give me the pill.
Do the work.
Yes, it doesn't involve as much work. I'm sure there are some psychiatrists and some psychologists that don't see eye to eye, but generally I've had a wonderful relationship with the psychiatrists that I've worked with, and I've needed them and they've needed me.
Okay.
How does that work practically when it comes to privacy? Like, are you allowed to, this is my ignorance, but are you allowed to talk about any of the details, or are you given permission to talk about the details from your client so that when you talk to the psychiatrist as a team, they have a full picture?
Absolutely. Every patient or every client, signs a release of information.
Okay.
So that you're able to talk to a specific person about a specific issue. It doesn't mean that the psychiatrist is privy to everything in their psychological file, but just as it relates to sign an authorization to release specific information. So I think they're both needed. Now, I think we have, a human orientation to like, if I can take a pill, let me just give me the pill. And this is the area which is nuanced for me. So, sometimes I think psychotropic medications, and I believe in them, because I've known people who have been tremendously helped by at least, to get through a rough patch, or, it's like a, we all know what it's like to jump in a car with a dead battery. It's just, there's, click, 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 and there's nothing. Psychotropic medication can just put a little life. It's like giving the engine a jump start. Now, does that person need to be on that medication for the rest of their life? Maybe in some extreme cases, yes, but generally, no. But what I'm a little bit concerned about is that we can overprescribe. For instance, ADHD. There are 1 in 4 kids between the ages of 3 and 17 have been diagnosed with ADHD. Yeah. 1 in 4 kids. And of the kids between, I think it's 5 and 11, and these numbers come off from the CDC, of the kids ages 5 to 11 who have been diagnosed with ADHD, 69% of them are on medications, ADHD medications, either Ritalin or Adderall, or maybe some, but those are main ones. And most of those are boys. Now, my question is, okay, when did the ADHD become a problem? When was it noticed in the lives of these little boys? Well, they're sitting in class. They won't sit still and pay attention. And it's like, okay, so we medicate them. And it's like, maybe little boys were not meant to be sitting in a classroom for hours on end, sitting still and paying attention.
Yeah.
And, I wasn't, I don't know what you guys were like when you were in
I
in
couldn't
grade
sit
school.
in school and sit still.
Yeah.
You couldn't?
No.
Yeah. So I was the same, and I'm sure if I was a kid in today's age, there would be every teacher would be going, this Beavis, we need to get him on some Ritalin.
I've said the same thing.
Back their medication back then was, and I'll never forget my 5th grade teacher, Mr. Durham. I would just, when I was just, off, just having a great time in class, out of my seat, I'd just hear the Wesley. Because he used to chew tobacco. He had a mouthful of skull tobacco. He was a World War II veteran. Wesley, I'm sick and tired of your behavior. Step out in the hall. And I know when I heard his boomy voice, that was it. He'd be giving me some behavior modification medication. So I'd go out in the hall. He'd pick the paddle off the top of the cabinet. He'd walk out. He'd knock on the door of the other the classroom, and could you come out? And the other teacher, because you need a witness when you're administering corporal punishment, and so the teacher would stand there. Of course, all the kids in both classrooms they're just ear to the wall, going, "Here it comes any moment now." And Mr. Durham would go, "That's it." He'd go, "Wesley, I'm just going to get you to bend over and touch your ankles."
Oh my
and
gosh!
Oh
so
my gosh!
It just
You don't know what it was like going to school and getting punished
Man.
that
oh
way,
my
do you?
goodness. And
These soft kids.
and
these
he
days.
and it was only ever three paddles, but it was like it was full on. It was like one, and it was like all the neurons, all the nerves in your butt were just, because when you bend over, all the nerve endings get pushed to the surface, and so when that came, everything jolts and was alive. And the second one was always the hardest, because the second one was like you knew it was coming, and you knew all those nerve endings are going, here it comes. And then the third one was like, okay, this is the last one. And then Mr. Durham would stand me up and he'd look me in the eyes and go, "Wesley, I do believe I'm looking at a changed man."
Dr. West, you've transported
I
to this
love
moment.
this. I love your new accent.
And so,
You should preach like that.
and so I'd go into class and I could sit still and pay attention. And it's like no medication
You actually could
required.
sit?
Oh, well, no. I'd be feeling it. I'd be feeling it because I didn't want to go out for a second helping.
Yeah.
And so that was, that helped me pay attention. But,
I've had that
it's
before.
like that was the medication back then. And and it worked. It worked.
Dang.
And
Now that's fascinating. Well, okay, so you brought up ADHD. There's something that I've been fascinated by lately.
so can I just say,
Oh, you go.
like some kids, yes, absolutely. But I'm not sure that every kid.
Yeah.
I just like,
Yeah.
no,
I think it's a good. It's a good
Yeah.
point. I never heard about, like, even when I was a kid, because everybody said I was kind of wild, probably struggled with focus. I was just, a ball of energy and whatever. So I'm sure, but I probably would have been in that same boat. But I feel like it wasn't common, or near as common as it is today, to just even the conversation about. I feel like almost every young person or whatever is aware of, and there's talk about, well, I've attention deficit, I can't focus well, I need to get some medication or whatever. And so I think maybe society has shifted in the awareness or the language and how it's how available.
But let me throw
It
this.
is.
Let me throw this at you. There's some research coming out that you can take that kid who would be a candidate for ADHD
Right.
medication,
Yeah.
so he can focus, and put him in front of a computer game,
Oh yeah,
and he can be there for hours.
that was me.
Okay.
I could do that.
Yeah.
I sit in
And-
front of
and
one
so-
for 8 hours long.
Yeah, so it's like, is it really is it what we're trying to get them to be attentive to?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
then the
It's
other
true.
thing
It's
is,
true. Good point.
these kids are growing up in a highly stimulated
Yeah.
environment.
Yeah.
I mean, my goodness.
How hard is it to focus now?
Oh, Well, yeah, exactly.
Or think about attention spans have been so shifted by social media, and everything is brief and shorter. And then when they go, I can't sit in a 45-minute class and listen to a teacher talk. Well, you probably need some Ritalin.
Oh, yeah,
and we've created the problem, and now we're medicating it.
Yes. And so there's a bit of a, sometimes I think, the relationship between psychology and the pharmaceutical industry it makes me a little bit uncomfortable sometimes, because if the psychologist can come up with a disorder, the pharmaceutical industry will come up with a medication that can treat that disorder. It's just maybe a little
It's a recipe for getting rich.
Yeah. I mean, here's something that, you said it's hard to sit in a lecture room for 45 minutes. When my son was going through medical school, attending was optional. You didn't need to come to lectures because they were all recorded. Wow. And so a lot of them just wouldn't even show up, because at the end of the day, you're going to be tested on material.
Yeah.
So it's like whether you watch it online or come to the lecture hall and hear it live. Yeah. The onus was on you to make sure you digested the material. But most of these medical students would go home. They'd be uploaded to YouTube, the lecture, and they would put it on double speed, because they are so acclimated to having so much information and processing it. And I just thought, that's really good. We've kind of trained people to digest.
I listen to audibles at 1.2 or 1.3.
Yeah.
I don't listen to them at one speed. I can't. It's so slow. I'm like, this is driving me nuts.
Do you sometimes listen to a podcast or a YouTube, and it's like, oh, come on, could you just get to the point where, oh yes, I can change the setting, and it's like,
it's great.
Time and a half. Okay, now
it depends
I'm
on
not as anxious.
The person doing the audible, and some have a slow cadence, and so I was like, I can't handle this. My brain's going nuts, so I speed it up real fast.
What was the memoir by Barack Obama? He said that even his wife, when she listened back to it, had to speed it up.
As her own husband, I'm sure she did.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. Okay, I have something that we've talked about, been kind of fascinated, and so I'm just curious your thoughts. And we mentioned this to you the other day, and you've heard of him, but Daniel Amen.
Oh yeah.
Who is kind of been what would you say? He's been a nuclear medicine doctor,
psychologist to the celebrities.
He's more than that, psychiatrist. He's a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
No, he prescribes. He does the whole thing and does a lot with nuclear medicine. And he has a completely out of the box type of perspective, and there are definitely criticism with his. I've read,
but any innovator,
I know,
is going to be criticized.
I agree, and there's some criticism behind not just. I think that there's potentially some validity to what he's saying and what he's done, that just from what I've listened to and read, and I'm starting listening to one of his books. But I also recognize the business aspect of it. There's some ethical things with, all of his supplements that are for sale. And this is like, oh, you definitely have this here. You should take all of these. And so some of that's feels a little shady. It's kind of like you said, there's the pharmaceutical and the psychology world. Well, when you're the psychology world and you're making your own pharmaceutical stuff and selling it as the treatment, it gets a little bit dicey. But I find his concept of it, he basically believes that all mental health, I don't know if I'll go so far as to say all, but he believes that all mental health is actually just brain health. That is really behind every mental deficiency, every mental illness, every mental health struggle is really a physical problem with the organ of the brain.
Okay.
And, he's known for the NFL, I think, is one of the primary doctors that hired him. He uses technology.
Yes.
And there again, the criticism of him is that it's really old technology. His argument is none of the new technology gives you what a SPECT gives you. That's a little bit different. But he really believes we can't maybe treat. Again, he's speaking to the psychiatry world more than the psychology world, because I think his solutions tend to be a mix of some therapies, but also medications. but it's usually based on the amount of blood flow, the metabolic, activity in certain portions of the brain gives him an indication. For example, in his book, he talks about 5 different portions of the brain that he associates with specific disorders.
Right.
So, your prefrontal cortex is going to be your executive function in the spot where he sees, diminished or sometimes increase, but he's found a ton of diminished activity in the prefrontal cortex happens with ADHD, which is odd because you would think it's the other way around. You would think it's an increase. I can't focus. I've got all this stuff going on. And he's actually saying that physically, that as he's looked at scans, he was surprised by it, that it's a lack of activity in the prefrontal cortex of people who can't focus.
Yeah.
And so he would prescribe there, whether it's the temporal lobes, whether it's in the limbic system, the different portions of it, the cingulate system.
And that's why Adderall and they're called stimulants, and Ritalin. They're stimulants. They stimulate activity.
Yeah.
So
I'm just curious of your take, because that's a fascinating, where do you see the intersection of the physiology and the psychology of someone? And do you think do you think it's valid? Do you think it's...
Well, I mean, he makes the claim, and it's a bold claim, that all mental health issues are an issue of the brain.
Yeah.
I mean, he studied more brains than I will ever study in my lifetime.
He scanned a lot of brains.
Yeah.
Over 230,000 brain scans.
Yeah.
He is.
And he's an advocate for therapy. There's he believes that there's benefit in therapy. I just wonder, whether we can, bring it all down to one organ of the body. Because I think, and as a believer in God, that He has created us to be fully integrated.
Yeah.
So, and now there may be a headquarters. The brain is definitely the headquarters. Have you ever had reflexology? That's the Chinese
acupuncture.
No, it's where they've located in the soles of your feet. Different parts of the soles of your feet are connected with different organs of the body.
Okay.
And I always, and they have these, charts that have pictures of the bottom of people's feet, and this little section of the foot is connected to the liver, and this little section of the foot is connected to the heart and whatever. And I've always thought, that sounds a little hokey to me. But when I go and have reflexology, it's just walk into this room and everybody's on stretchers, and you've got these specialists that just massage the bottom of your feet and other muscles in your body. Whenever they get to my feet, they start pushing a certain area on the sole of my foot, and I fall asleep just instantly.
Really?
Yes.
Try it.
Every every time. In fact, I've stopped going to reflexology when I'm tired, because it just irritated me that I would go and I'd pay $50 and sleep through half of it. And it was like, it'd be a good sleep. But, and so it's like, wow, maybe there is some type of integration there, because, pressing a certain part of my foot sends me just into a deep sleep.
Interesting.
To the point where I, will start snoring. And I'm generally not a snorer unless I'm sleeping really, really deeply. And so, to answer your question, yes, the brain is a big, it's the command center.
Yeah.
But, the stomach is also, has an impact on mental health as well.
Yeah.
There's neural connections between the gut and the brain. Like a large portion of the serotonin in your body is produced in your gut, not
It's in the glands, right?
Not in your head. So I just think we are far more integrated than what we realize, and so the brain is the center of all mental health issues. Well, if he's a genius. You know, he may be, you know.
There's definitely some criticism. There's a lot of psychiatrists that don't necessarily see it that way.
Well, sure.
And so,
and we're all in our particular industries wanting to protect the dogma of our particular field. So, but I appreciate what he's brought to. And I know we're not here to, you know, analyze the character of the man. I have every respect, but the concept of the
part of it just fascinated me.
Well,
because I do agree, like his point is every other field of medicine, we look at the physiology, except when it comes to mental health, and we're treating it without actually looking at the organ behind it. And he has a lot of stories that are kind of fascinating and hard to at least refute of people that they've found activity problems in certain portions of the brain, and then they prescribe. And again, I don't know how different it is because he even talks about, as you could get his books and read, and he talks about, 5 main areas of the brain that are responsible for these typical behaviors that he sees. And so almost people can kind of self-diagnose, I struggle with focus, so there's probably a problem in my prefrontal cortex. I struggle with anger, so there's probably a problem in my, hippocampus, different, things like that. And then you could get a scan and go, yep, there's not as much activity here, or yep, we should prescribe this. Now, you could probably go talk to a psychiatrist and go, I get angry all the time.
Yeah.
And I can't focus. I just lose focus. I have to get in, and they're going to go, well, I'm going to prescribe you this medicine.
Yeah, have some Valium. Calm you down.
Which is probably the same result you may have gotten even if you spent a lot of money and you looked at your brain scan to tell you physically, yep, that's what you see. You know what I mean? Like, so I think some of them maybe end with similar results, maybe not, but get there differently.
Yeah, I mean, the brain is such a fascinating organ of the body.
It is.
What is it? It takes up 2% of our body weight, but soaks up 20% of the blood oxygen in our body. Wow. I mean, so that's a computer that's that's an organ that's really working hard. Yeah. And I love the fact, I mean, it really is the wild, wild west of the human body. Yeah. Every other organ we pretty well figured out. Yeah. Except the brain. I mean, it's and because it doesn't really have movable parts. Mm-hmm. It's like, the heart is like slam dunk. You got 3 chambers, you got some valves, and look at that valve, open and shut, and it doesn't quite shut. You got a leaky valve. So I think cardiologists may have it a little easier that way.
That it seems like, I think my eat the fish, spit out the bones with him was the potential validity that we underestimate how much brain health can impact mental health. Yeah. The construct that we focus primarily, almost his argument was exclusively on the software, the psychology, but to almost the complete exclusion of the hardware. And looking at even just some things I've had recently on a minimal level of where I had weeks where my brain I felt foggy in my thinking, and even just implementing some adjustments in nutrition and.
You also were talking about, what were you smoking?
I knew what you were. Let me paraphrase this. To clarify.
What were you doing, mushrooms?
Healthy mushrooms, the kind you can get at Whole Foods. I really
the legal ones.
The legal ones. I upped my intake of, lion's mane and reishi and ashwagandha and all these, and I have like a superfood, like mushroom tea at
Why
night.
don't you bring the tea in on an episode, and we're going to drink this tea.
And see whether we're making any sense at the end of the podcast.
But I thought, so to me, I'm like, okay, and obviously, like you said, there's so many insane anecdotes of his nephew who at 8 years old was drawing homicidal pictures. Yeah. And he did one scan. One of his big phrases is, you don't know until you look under the hood. One of his big, that's why he's seen so many scans. And he sees there's some sort of cyst on part of his brain. He drains it, and the behavior changed.
Yes.
And so there's all these, and a lot of that's anecdotal. And I think he gets a lot of,
you know what's fascinating about his story? So when he, first the way the story goes, he scanned his nephew, and he's 9, and he scanned him with a but that only gives you like blood flow activity. You can't actually see anything. Well, nothing showed up in the left temporal lobe. Like, can't see anything. Like there was no activity. It's like he doesn't have the left temporal lobe, where the violent tendencies and all those things come into play in the brain. And so he ends up going and having an MRI done, or CAT scan, fMRI, one of the two, because that's where they can actually scan and see, and that's when they see this golf ball sized cyst in the space where his left temporal lobe is supposed to be, that had formed. Even with that, he almost could not find a surgeon or a doctor that would operate and drain it. And they were not convinced. This is what they said. They were not convinced that the cyst was causing his behavior problems.
Yeah. Well,
they
and
say you need to go. They actually said they had trouble with, I think, not only doctors' offices trying to convince them because he's not a surgeon. He's not going to go in and do that. But most of them said, we won't do that until he goes through all kinds of behavior therapy first. And he was like, he's got a cyst. I don't need to go. He needs this. So finally found someone who did it and drained it. And then immediately his whole behavior changed. Immediately.
I had an interesting case where a widow came to me who, her and a husband were just absolute sold out, dedicated followers of Jesus. And he was the nicest, most godly guy. And when he died of brain cancer, and or he had a primary cancer, and the secondary cancer was a tumor in the brain. And in counseling his widow, she said, in the last weeks of his life, he became extremely mean to me in the words that he would say, and he would use the most disgusting of words, cussing, using, she would say, using the F word about me, and every vile word. And she said it was so hurtful. And she said, but I talked to my doctor, and the doctor said, no, that's the tumor in the brain, having pressing in on some part of the brain where he knew these words, because he, was in the industry, out there in the marketplace, and he'd hear all these words, and they do register. It's just they register in a part of the brain that said, we're not going to use these words.
It filtered them.
The
filter was gone.
Exactly. So when the tumor was pressing in on that area of the brain, that the filter was gone, and so. Yeah,
that happened with my wife's grandmother when she had Alzheimer's, and toward the end, it changed her in many ways, into where she was really nasty to her husband at times.
Yes,
even though he was taking care of her, and she actually would say swear words.
Yes,
and
most
all my life knew her as so uncharacteristic. Like, wait, what did you just say? Like you sweet old grandma that's followed Jesus all her life, and we're like, whoa, what did you just say? And then you have to you realize with Alzheimer's, you're like, okay, there's an issue in the brain that is causing you to behave some way other than you would. And so I think there's enough of those stories that I think you can't just throw. I wouldn't just throw out what he's saying. I think there's, and I love the stuff he says about brain health.
And that's where I think I love the phrase used. There's a Wild Wild West of an untapped. How much can brain health affect mental health? We know it does. But I think the best, again, in my uneducated mind in the field, the best critique I heard against him, though, was I read an article where they said that he oversimplifies what he considers the direct connection between mind and brain.
Okay. Because
that is, to me, one of the areas where it's wild, wild west of, like you said, it's one thing to dissect a heart, but you can't dissect the mind.
Well, you
can.
Well, you can, but it's not. It's like there's more fatty tissue in here. It just
because the mind is. It's like there's physiologically there's the gut health, but then there's the spiritual and soul components, and it's so.
fascinating.
That may be where his oversimplification maybe gets him in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, but he's at least having a stab at it.
Yes.
Which I appreciate.
I do too.
You know, it's
Yeah.
like, I mean, the wonderful thing about scientific discovery, and that's why, you know, one area, you know, I love the field of psychology. Sometimes the profession of psychology, I have trouble with, especially when it gets politicized.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, whenever you hear the word, you know, the phrase, the science is settled,
Yeah.
I can tell you that that's
never.
not been uttered by a scientist. That's probably been uttered by a politician who's pushing an agenda. But, you know, the whole field of science is to be perpetually curious,
Yeah.
and to come up with some, you know, some claim that seems bizarre, but let's not, you know, write it off.
Yeah.
Let's test it.
Yeah.
Let's apply the rigor of scientific research to it
Absolutely.
to
Yeah.
see whether there's something there.
Yeah.
And so, you know, in the spirit of that, I'm thinking more power to you. You
Yeah.
know, as
Yeah.
long as
Yeah.
you're not, you know, dissecting brains while people are still alive.
Right.
You know, go for it. And, you
Yeah.
know, and if it's truth, you know, ultimately it will be tested so much that we
Yeah.
can, as scientists, not say the science is settled, but say research suggests very strongly
Yeah.
that, you know, with these inputs, generally you can look at these type of outputs. That's what the science reveals so far. So I have a lot of grace for scientists that are willing to put themselves out, you know, kind of just go a little bit beyond the edge of the standard dogma of what's acceptable.
He could be the Galileo of psychiatry.
Well, it does.
Yeah.
It does.
There you go.
It does feel like, I will say, it does feel like that psychiatry as a field, or dealing with it. It's like you would know this probably just from your study, and you're even more recent in your study. But it just feels like we have lots of knowledge, but for whatever, it doesn't seem like we're getting better with mental health collectively as humans. Like it seems.
Oh, okay.
I'm just saying.
I see
You
where
know what
you're
I'm saying?
going.
I'm saying
Yeah.
in general, all we hear about is we have more problems with anxiety, more problems with depression, more problems with this. You know, like it's like you'd think is we're figuring this out, that the trends are going the other way because we know how to treat, we know how to do this, but it doesn't seem that way. It seems like we're going in the wrong direction.
Well, I think
You
the
know?
world specializes in crazy making.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
you
I mean,
know,
I'm
it's
not
like-
putting that on the psychiatrist. I'm just saying it just it can't hurt.
Well, it's keeping people in the mental
employed.
health field
Keeping people employed.
very busy. And, you know, I'm not going to go so far as to we're behind it all. You know,
No.
this whole gender thing. You know, we're really pushing that because, although unfortunately, you know, it does create more opportunities for
Sure.
you know, the mental health field. But I think as somebody who has a faith that is unchanging, in the sense that the basis of our faith is unchanging, I think as society more and more dismantles some of those traditions and structures, what it's being replaced with is anxiety producing and depression producing.
Yeah.
I mean, when you know, I can you know, everybody's free to make up their own mind, but if you decide that, you know, God is no longer part of your how you conceptualize the world, fair enough. But what's going to take its place? And nihilism, you know, it's all meaningless. You know, and it's just like. We have no purpose, and you know that really plays into you know, well, what's the point? And people do lose a sense of purpose and a sense that I'm here for a spiritual reason, and that can really affect the mental health, and that's why I think it's. Who was it? G.K. Chesterton that says, you know,
His favorite. Don't quote G.K.
Don't
Chesterton.
tear down a
start crying.
fence until you've asked yourself the question of why that fence was erected in the first place.
Oh, the fact that you just quoted Chesterton makes my whole day.
Okay. Well, we're
the
going to
only
wrap
quote
this
I know.
up today.
I know.
So I'll go ahead and finish it up. Put the camera on me. Russ is crying right now in a corner somewhere, and
I find a way to quote him in almost every podcast. don't
he
I?
tries.
I love Chesterton.
He does. So,
That's great.
I love. We could probably
Yeah.
go down rabbit holes forever. Rabbit trails. What are they called? We could probably
Rabbit
do
paths.
Rabbits have trails
Rabbit
or holes?
paths.
I think they have trails, not paths, but paths. Holes.
Rabbit Mountains.
Rabbit mountains. Thanks for being
Wait,
here.
I got 2 very important questions.
All right, we wrap it up.
Do you watch Ted Lasso or Shrinking?
Ted Lasso.
There you go.
There we go.
Yeah, he loves Ted Lasso as well.
Oh.
He's
Yeah.
addicted.
Do you like Ted Lasso?
I've watched, I think most of whatever the last season. I watched a couple in the last season, and I just kind of wasn't super excited. But I'll watch it at some point. I'm just
But never
I like
got
it.
never
It's
got
like-
into Shrinking?
No.
no.
I don't watch much.
Psychologist.
Yeah, I don't watch much television.
Yeah.
That's why
But-
he's in good mental health.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, I
that's
knew
why.
you probably didn't.
Yeah.
I really
I-
resonate
I don't
with
really
his-
either, but
Yeah.
I just found it really refreshing, that the character of Ted Lasso.
So
being
positive.
Positive and
Yeah.
upbeat, even when
Naive.
when he's down,
Yeah.
he's totally been placed in the most,
Yeah.
a position that he had no business being in, technically, but psychologically, he was the right man.
Oh, come on.
I do like his. He has that positive, happy-go-lucky.
did you watch the
Person.
finale yet?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't. So don't
Yeah.
talk about it.
All right.
Don't talk about it. Save it for another time. I don't wanna hear.
So,
'Cause I will
we
watch
could have
it.
a whole nother
Because
session.
I will
on
watch
this.
it. Oh, you guys. All right.
All right, so final words. Be a goldfish. And,
Okay.
and you need to watch
I'm
Ted
for
Lasso
more.
to get that. Dr. West, I wish we had 10 more episodes with you.
Yeah.
Well, I'll come back again one day.
do it.
Let's
do
do
it.
it.
Yeah, I actually, Columbus has really surprised me.
Good.
So it's now on my list.
I love
Maybe
it.
I'll write a book here one day.
Hey,
Come,
that's it.
do it.
Do it.
Yeah.
You can come here and we'll provide some space, and I'll go to your place. And you
Yeah,
can provide
absolutely.
space for me.
Seriously, guys.
We'll make a swap.
We've got we got a place there in Southern
Do you have
California.
a writing cabin?
do I have a writing-
Donald Miller? Do you have a writing shed
I've
that
got
I can come use?
an office. in
Okay.
Oh.
Newport Beach. If that.
Oh,
Okay.
I'll take that.
I think I'm going to
I'll
go work
take
on my
that.
book this summer in Newport Beach.
Absolutely, you'd be most welcome.
If I go out to their West Coast out by LA, I'm going to try to connect with you.
Oh, you guys,
We've had a
standing invitation.
we've had
Oh, I
a joy.
love
It's
that.
been a joy having you here.
Yeah, it's
Thank
been
you.
refreshing.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for the work that you're doing. I mean, you're really slugging it out in the trenches here, doing good work.
Yeah.
Providing hope and just a really good conversation.
Yeah.
In the context of a world that has kind of lost its way in terms of sanity and and in terms of society at large.
Yeah.
Society at large needs to be given some good mental health counseling because some of what's going on out there is distressing a lot of people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing. God's using you, and keep it up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening and being a part of this conversation. As always, we love that your voice and your ear is part of these moments, and it makes it better. And so feel free, as always, to send in any questions to podcast@thex.church. That's podcast@thex.church. And until next time, we'll see you next week.